This episode is brought to you by Blueprint Health. Blueprint Health is a measurement-based care platform for mental health providers. You can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprinthealth. And also this episode is brought to you by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com, the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers in private practice. They're who I use in my practice. Check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. Hello, everyone. This is episode number 200. Can you believe that? Welcome to the podcast. Glad you've joined me. I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to this special episode of the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to you hearing from my guest on the podcast, although she's really not a guest if you think about it, because she's been behind the scenes and involved in the podcast for a long time now. But I'm so happy for you to get to hear from my wonderful virtual assistant, Rachel Bond. And she and I are going to have a conversation about kind of the evolution of the podcast in this episode. And I'm looking forward to you listening in. It's quite a milestone if I really think about it. It's hard to believe that I made it all the way to 200 episodes. When I first started the podcast back in 2017, I never would have guessed that it would grow and have as much reach as it has. I've just been blown away by that. You know, as of this episode, we've had over 150,000 downloads of the podcast, which is I'm just blown away by that. And thank you to all of you that have been loyal listeners and are taking the time to follow the podcast, or as we used to call it, subscribe to the podcast, although a lot has changed within Apple and just all of the podcasting world. But anyway, in this episode, we're going to be pulling back the curtain just a little bit and really kind of letting you know some of the behind the scenes things that we work on every week, but also let you hear from Rachel, because she's just a wonderful person and really has got a heart for what we do. And you can certainly tell it in just the work that she does, not only on the podcast, but also all of the social media that I put out there. Rachel, no credit for me with that. Rachel handles all of that for me as well. So I'm really looking forward to you hearing from Rachel in this episode. But before we get to Rachel, I wanted to let you know about another free upcoming webinar that I'm going to be, a live webinar that I'm going to be putting on October the 28th. And in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about using Google Workspace for practice management. Those of you that have been around a while know about the courses that I've put out there, but I'm going to talk about, give people a good overview of why you might want to use Google Workspace, or you might not want to use it. But anyway, I'd love for you to join me for this free webinar, and it's going to be at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time on October the 28th, which is a Thursday. But you can get to that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/GWS webinar. And that'll get you to the landing page to where you can register. And even if you can't show up for the live webinar, excuse me, my tongue is tied, be sure to register anyway, and that way you can get access to the replay of the webinar. So love for you to join me for that event that's coming up. And also, before we get to my conversation with Rachel, love for you to check out our sponsors, Therapy Notes, and you can get to them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, and also Blueprint Health. They are a digital measurement-based care platform that will help you measure what you're doing in your practice. So take a listen to a little more information about our two wonderful sponsors. As your practice grows, the systems and processes you have in place will keep your practice running smoothly. That's why it's important to have an electronic health record system that is specific to mental health providers. Therapy Notes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance all right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. They're who I use in my practice. And did I mention that they are one of the top-rated EHRs for mental health providers? Their support is also second to none. So be sure to check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes. And be sure to use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. That's therapynotes.com. And this episode is also brought to you by Blueprint Health. One of the best ways to serve clients in your practice is through measurement-based outcomes. In fact, more and more third-party payers, aka insurance companies, are demanding measurable outcomes. And with more and more emphasis on good mental health, having a way to measure your outcomes just makes sense. Introducing Blueprint, the measurement-based care platform that administers, scores, and charts hundreds of symptom rating scales to give clinicians deeper insights into treatment progress. Ultimately, by helping behavioral health providers to grow top-line practice revenue, increase clinician satisfaction, and deliver more effective care. So be sure and check them out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprint health. And by going to that URL, you can also get your first month free. Again, that's practiceoftherapy.com/blueprint health. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so excited that this episode has finally happened and that I have the one and only rock star, Rachel Bond, with me. Rachel is the person that makes all this happen. And so, Rachel, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Gordon. I'm so excited.
Yes. So Rachel's getting to edit her own episode. So Rachel, as I start with everyone, tell folks a little bit about yourself and your story and how you've landed here and all of that.
Well, I was going to grad school about 3 years ago. I had a job that helped pay for my tuition, but I still needed some extra cash. So one of my professors from undergrad suggested that I check out this website called Fiverr. And it's an online freelancing website. I was trying to think what I would be good at and what I like to do. Well, I like to write and I like listening to podcasts. So I put up my very first gig was writing people's podcast show notes. And that's how I met you, Gordon.
Yes.
And from there, we took our communication off of Fiverr. And Gordon, you started pushing me to do more things like editing the podcast, doing your social media, and uploading everything to WordPress. Even though I might have fought you along the way, I was like, are you sure I can do this? And you're like, yes, you got this. You got this. You taught me how to do everything I needed to do. And, I think I started around episode 50 and we are getting close to episode 200. So 3 years. Can you believe it?
That just blows me away. That just because I'm glad you reminded me about what episode number, and it's hard to believe that we've been doing this together that long. And it's just it's been an amazing thing. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned 200, and our plan is that this will be episode 200. But as you've done all of this behind the scenes, I guess two things is one, I guess, what are the themes and kind of things that you've heard as kind of an outsider looking in that have kind of stood out for you in all of this?
From an outsider looking in, I love the business aspect of everything that you talk about on the show. So truthfully, I don't think you need to have a private practice to get information from this show. If you are in any sort of business, the tips and advice that you and your guests give are very useful, especially for me, someone who was kind of starting a small business. I learned so much from listening to all the interviews. And another thing that I found very interesting is listening to everything about mental health during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot of valuable things around self-care and stress just from listening to the different therapists that you have on the show. And I also like the conversations that you have around work-life balance. So when COVID hit, everyone was working from home, and there was a huge blur between when you're working and when you should actually be living your life. And for people that typically work from home like myself, just hearing more of those conversations was interesting and valuable, and seeing how people were taking the hit from working from home. And I just thought that was interesting because that's something that I've been doing anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's been, I think a lot of folks have just kind of transitioned back to the office, which I have done, but we're taking more precautions, around COVID and that kind of thing. But you're right. I think this whole work-life balance has been something that's been a big theme for me as well, just over this past year. And just, as I've shared in other episodes, just, with my wife being disabled and just all of that, and trying to balance all of that. Well, that's good to hear that those are things that have been valuable to you. As you have done the podcast, what have been the things that have been the most fun for you?
I love the social media aspect of it. On Instagram is really fun. Promoting your podcast on social media is great, not only to get listeners, but to get guests on your show. And I've learned a lot about the different platforms. So we use Canva for the graphics, and we use Buffer for scheduling the social media posts. So it is interesting looking at it from like a business perspective versus a personal perspective. You're kind of seeing how everything gets laid out. And I like learning about that. And I also like doing things I wouldn't typically do. Like on my personal Instagram, I wouldn't create an IGTV, but I've been doing that for the podcast. And I think that's a great thing to utilize for any business owner. So I would recommend, especially if you're recording podcasts, or if you're even going to be a guest on the podcast, you should definitely grab that video and post it as an IGTV, because I think those have been getting really popular for you.
Right. Yeah. And it's been great because I've gotten, as I was telling Rachel before we started recording, I've really gotten a lot of folks that have really complimented our Instagram feed and all of that sort of thing. And quite honestly, I have not been as active on Instagram as probably I should be. And Rachel kind of covers me on that. So that's a good thing. So Rachel, you want to kind of walk folks through just kind of the behind the scenes about how we do the podcast?
Well, currently we're recording on Zoom, and once this recording's done, you'll upload it to Google Drive for me. And you also include like your intro and your outro for the week. I take those clips and I put it into my audio editing software, and I have a template set up so it goes by pretty fast. Also, like in the software, I can kind of tell if there's something that's like crazy loud or crazy slow or low. And I go back through that and I comb through it and make sure there's nothing going on. Like sometimes there's coughing, sometimes there's an interruption. So I go back through and make sure that everything sounds smooth. I get it on iTunes so that way I can put it through the levelator. It's a free software. It levels, it compresses, and it normalizes the audio. After I get it back onto iTunes, I convert it to an MP3 so that way the file is smaller. And that's kind of at the point I can put in the ID3 tags So if you're thinking about starting a podcast, the ID 3 tags are the artist name, album, year, genre, etc. It's just good for getting your podcast found when people are searching for it. From there, the audio is pretty much done, so I can put it onto our Libsyn, which will distribute the podcast to Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Practice of Therapy.
Right.
From there, I can write the show notes. So I plug in the audio into otter.ai, which is a transcription service. It takes a couple minutes, but it will have everything that anybody said. And I put the transcript into WordPress, but I also use it to write our show notes. So if you haven't checked out thepracticeoftherapy.com, that's where I put all of our show notes. And I also put it into Libsyn. So if you're looking at Apple on your phone, you'll see my show notes. It's like a blog version of what we talked about. So that's how I originally started for Gordon, was writing those blogs. And I'm still doing it 3 years later. Still love it.
Yeah.
From there, everything's pretty much done for the episode. And then that's when I go into social media mode.
Right. And one of the things that has been great is with the social media. Since we do record on Zoom, we're able to record the video. And so you want to talk about just kind of how you kind of pull the video clips and how you decide all of that.
Yeah, so before we record the episode, every guest kind of gives a little blurb about who they are and what the episode's going to be about. I have a Mac, so I download the video file and I use iMovie to edit that out. And then I put it into Canva, which kind of makes it look prettier. And that way you can change the size of the video file. So it will look better for Instagram if you put it through Canva first. And then you can also put it through Canva to be on Twitter. So that way it's a different dimension. And then I also pull clips for the IGTV on iMovie. And since I've already listened to the entire episode at that point, I kind of know what's the most interesting. And I try to pick things that really summarize the whole episode, or I pick something where there's a little like conversation between you and the guest rather than just one person talking. So that's how I do that with the videos.
That's awesome. And that was news to me, because I just let Rachel do her thing because she's done such a great job. You know, the other thing about Rachel is that she has launched a nonprofit organization, and I've kind of learned a little bit about that. But Rachel, I want you to tell folks about that, because I think there are probably a lot of folks out there that could probably benefit from what you're doing.
I was talking about one of my professors earlier that told me to get on Fiverr. Well, that same professor, Dr. Alan Seidman, we decided to start a nonprofit together called Affordable College Prep. Currently, all of our services are free. We are looking for high school students, and we want to help you finish your college applications, write those essays, and find scholarships. And we also help students that are looking to go to grad school as well. You can follow us on Instagram at Affordable College Prep, and our website is affordablecollegeprep.com. When I went to college, I made a lot of mistakes, so I'm hoping to help other students get out of school with as little debt as possible. According to the National Center for Education, only about 59% of students seeking a bachelor's degree at a 4-year institution have completed that degree within 6 years. So not only do we want students to get into that college, but we want them to graduate. Otherwise, you're going to go to college for 3 years, have a bunch of debt, and no degree to show for it. So we want to see them, get from that application all the way to the degree.
Yeah, that's great. And how was it that you kind of came up, or what, I guess maybe what was the passion behind all of that for you, and how you kind of came up with that idea to start this?
All the things that I did, I would just tell people, don't do that. I made so many mistakes. For instance, I didn't know that you have to fill out the FAFSA every year when you're in college. When my sophomore year came around, I didn't have the money to go to school. I had to fill out the FAFSA very last minute. when that time came around, I didn't have a dorm. They were like, we're out of dorms. So I had to find someone on Craigslist to live with. That was one of the things. I worked 3 jobs when I was in college.
Wow.
So that's also something I would steer students away. When you are in school, you can focus on school, because having 3 jobs and getting off campus 3 times a day is not the way to go.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that has been kind of a theme on the podcast is just really just time management and just being able to really think about that. And I'm so glad that you're doing some work to kind of help people with that, around that whole topic. So yeah, that's great. And of course, we'll have links to all your stuff in the show notes here. So to switch gears a little bit, I'm going to put you on the spot here just a little bit, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning. What particular episodes really kind of stood out for you over the last 150 that you've been working on?
Some of my favorite episodes from the recent past are the episode with Whitney and James about the Enneagram. They really inspired me to go take the Enneagram test. So I thought that was really cool. And then I went back and listened to the episodes and kind of heard their hot takes about what my Enneagram number means. I believe I'm an 8. That's
awesome.
What I'm going with. I need to get a little deeper into it, and then I'll revisit it.
Okay.
Did you learn a lot at their Zoom webinar?
Yes, I did. It was a great course, and I think it's still available through PsychMaven. But yes, the Enneagram has been something that I've really delved into a lot this past year, and really helping me not only understand myself better, but it's also helped me a great deal in my clinical work and being able to pull that out and think about that.
If you missed that episode, I highly recommend going back and checking it out. I'll link it in the show notes, and I'll link the webinar.
Yeah.
And then Andrea Jones, Beating the Social Media Overwhelm. I kind of definitely relate to that because, like I said, I do Gordon's social media. I do other clients' social media. I do Affordable College Prep social media. So there's just a lot going on. And I think that one was useful. Lots of tips and tricks, like starting the calendar and just making sure you're way ahead of it. That way it's not like draining your time. And then looking a little farther back, LaRhonda Starling, I loved her episode, Self-Care During Times of Crisis. Yes. And I think, that one's useful just like overall. You don't have to be in crisis to listen to the self-care episode. Love that one. And my last favorite, I put this one together, so it's kind of cheating, but it's a best of social justice in and out of the therapy room. So May 2020, Black Lives Matter really came into the forefront, and you had a lot of great episodes with different therapists about that movement. And I put together a best of episode, and I think that one is great. If you don't have time to go back and listen to every single episode, it gives you a little bit of everything in regards to social justice in the therapy room.
Right. Yeah, those are ones that stood out for me too. I think about I can picture all of those people in there. Just thinking about that. So so again, put you on the spot a little bit. What do you feel like is something that is missing from the podcast?
Gordon, I love the episodes where it's just you. And honestly, here's my thought. You wanted my thoughts. I'm going to give them to you. Here's my thought. So I love the interviews. I love the solo Gordon episodes. Let's do a mini Gordon episode once a week.
Awesome.
That's my thought.
Okay. That's great. So, okay. You've put a challenge out to me. And so kind of a big announcement that's coming out of this particular episode. And this is going to help hold me accountable as well, Rachel, is that I've got a new podcast that's going to be coming out, hopefully towards the end of 2021 or the beginning of 2022. But the URL is actually there, kindnessandcompassion.com or kindnessandcompassion.org is there. Nothing is there yet, but got a podcast coming out, and we're going to be partnering with one of my colleagues, Kayla Tapia. And Kayla has been a therapist in my practice here in the past. She's moved on to do other things, but she is going to co-host with me. And it's going to be a podcast about all things around how do we integrate just kindness and compassion in our lives, of being able to find life balance around that, and really advocating for ending all the polarization that we've got in the world, of really learning how to put practices in place that we can kind of live more in, not to sound too cliche or too Coca-Cola commercial, but more in peace and harmony with each other, and just being able to put those practices in place, whether it's through spirituality, whether it's through other health and wellness kinds of activities and all of those kinds of things. So I'm looking forward to that. And so I'm sure I'm going to get Rachel on that podcast, because I just know enough about her that she would be a good person to talk to about those things as well. So,
wow, Gordon, I'm so excited for the new podcast. You've heard it here first, everybody. Kindness and compassion. Check it out. I'm so happy.
Yes. So, well, good. So, well, Rachel, what other things would you want people to know before we kind of close out this episode?
Wow. Well, thank you first and foremost for everybody who is listening to this. You are helping me have a job right now. I love working for Gordon. 3 years going strong. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for you.
Well, thanks, Rachel. I'm so glad we did this, and I hope hopefully we can do it again, because Rachel is just such a creative person, and she just does things in such a wonderful way. And what is great, and again, this is kind of a little bit of a plug for learning how to outsource well. And one of the things that with Rachel is that I can just hand it off to her and no worries whatsoever. I don't have to worry. She takes the pressure away. And so that's a real important piece in just running any business, is knowing where to outsource and how to outsource.
Yeah, that's a good lesson, especially social media. That can be totally time consuming. So if that's something you're currently doing with your practice, highly recommend checking out Fiverr or asking a colleague if they know anyone who does social media management, because that can take so much time out of your day.
Right. So, well, Rachel, thanks again for being on this special episode. And I'm so glad you're part of my life.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me, Gordon.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed getting to hear from Rachel and getting to know her. I'm just so thankful for our relationship and the fact that she does so much behind the scenes and helping me with the podcast and helping me stay organized and on track and not get too far into the weeds. So I'm just so happy that she joined me for this special milestone episode number 200. And I'm sure you'll get to hear more from Rachel in the future. And also, I just wanted to put a bug in your ear, and this kind of holds me accountable a little bit. I do have plans to start a new podcast, and it's not necessarily related to the practice of therapy, other than it is going to be co-sponsored with me, not co-sponsored, but co-hosted with me by another therapist friend of mine, Kayla Tapia. And I think you'll love getting to know Kayla. But the name of the podcast is going to be the Kindness and Compassion Podcast. And as the name implies, we're going to be talking about how people can practice kindness and compassion in their lives, and also giving it a little bit of a therapeutic spin, and also just get to hear from hopefully lots of great people that are really out there trying to change the world by thinking about our lives in different ways. So anyway, more to come on that. But anyway, by saying it out loud and putting it out there, I'm going to hold myself accountable to get that new podcast started here, hopefully at the beginning of 2022. So, but lots more good episodes coming up on this podcast, the Practice of Therapy podcast. And be sure and check out the free webinar coming up on October the 28th. And again, you can get to that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/GWS webinar. And also be sure and check out our sponsors, Therapy Notes, and you can get to them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, and also check out Blueprint Health. They are a measurement-based care platform for mental health providers, and you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprint health. So thanks again, folks, for joining me for this particular episode. Be sure to take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or Google Podcasts or any more of the numerous podcatchers out there. We can be found on most all of them. So take care, and I look forward to being with you here in the future. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.